Right. Darren, what's going on in the Australian business jet market?
Okay, it's actually it's been quite encouraging the last couple of years. There's a lot of growth, especially there's a mix. There's the typical Australian market where there's a lot of older aircraft. The Australian buyers are generally not as generous with their money as the Southeast Asian market. So we see a lot of the older stuff like Challenger 604s and smaller airplanes, Phantoms, Praetors, and Hawkers are sort of the weapons of choice down there due to the constraint. But they all do the job, given that it's essentially 4.5 hours coast to coast. So they're reasonable aeroplanes, but to get outside the region, of course, the other growth area that we're seeing now is the ultra long range aeroplanes. So there's quite a few global 7500s. I think it's 5 in there now, and more coming. G650ERs, and then the odd G550 and straight global classics or XRS, because those two particular models have got very good range still. Whilst they're old aeroplanes, they've got great range and they work well in that. There's still one stop to the US, but nevertheless, it's still not bad.
And we saw a bounce back. I remember charter and Australian market bounced back heavily after COVID, or use actually, during quarantines and lockdowns. After that, we saw it take off. Is it still going? Have you still got those new individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of guys that started to use them, in the new normal, where they didn't want to go and sit in an airport with hundreds of other people, because Australia was probably one of the worst lockdowns and the worst quarantine procedures in the world during the COVID. So straight after COVID, people were chartering aircraft very, very heavily, and the trend has continued because they've got used of the convenience. Australian airports are not known for being particularly efficient either, as in when you're travelling on an airline, a lot of delays, a lot of cancellations and so forth, like the US. And so people are quite happy to jump in an aeroplane. And if you look at the prices now, the airlines in Australia, there's always been a 2-airline monopoly. So the prices have gone skyrocketing. So, city pairs such as Sydney-Melbourne, which is the most popular, that particular flight, if you're doing 4 or 5 people on business class on one of the 2 airlines, then the cost delta between taking something like a Phantom or a Hawker between those 2 cities is very minimal. And of course, it's on demand and on their time. So yeah, it's still pretty popular.
And are you seeing the connectivity go with the airlines? Are they still, because Australia is so big, and if you're going to go, there's some routes where it's got very well served city routes between the major cities, but after that it falls down, doesn't it?
It does. So yeah, I mean the corporates have always been used for those smaller towns in the interior of the country. Not just jets, a lot of turboprops too. There's a lot of turboprops in Australia. The old Conquests are still a very popular aeroplane, and a lot of King Airs flying out to the regional zones. But we see more and more corporate jet charters and operations into these more remote areas as well.
And why did you take so long to set up in Australia?
I left Australia 40 years and came to Southeast Asia because I saw that the industry in Australia was essentially dead at that time. There was a handful of corporate jets in those days. But it has matured. When my partner, Dane Williams, approached me to come back and look at the Australian market, I kind of laughed and said, no way. But I went down and I listened, and we sat down and we spoke about it. I looked at the market statistics and saw the growth, and he wanted to use the ACAM brand in Australia, being a well-established brand everywhere else. So he thought it was important that we did it. So I basically agreed on the premise that he does most of the work and I just share in the profit. Although that's not true. I do a lot of. I'm very active in the business as well, but more so remotely. I don't get down there too often unless we've got a meeting with a regulator or something like that I have to attend.
And everyone always talks about how hard it is doing business in different markets. How does Australia rank? Australia rank. Actually, you have got Austria as well, haven't you?
No, we're not in Austria, although we do business in Austria.
How does Australia rank against?
Look, it's tough. It's tough. In fact, I said to Dane after probably 6 months, I'd forgotten how tight-butted most Australian businessmen were. I mean, they're absolutely mean and horrible, and it makes my clients here look like choir boys, you know?
You're just playing to the home crowd.
Yeah, I know.
And do you see it as it's a very mature business jet market, or very mature aviation market, isn't it? It's one of the classic ones where you've got semi-turboprops, you have that people moving up. Do you see it as a stable grower?
Yeah, I think it will continue to grow. I mean, certainly the airlines they're not expanding a great deal because of the monopoly system, and it's always been lousy. Both airlines don't do a particularly great job. It's absolutely terrible. They're full cost service providers, but it's a bit like having Ryanair and EasyJet as your national carriers. It's not the best, but in terms of general aviation and business aviation, yeah, it's always been heavy due to the size and the remoteness of the country. So I think with this trend, and again in Australia, of course, next gen as well coming in, who see a lot more value than perhaps their tight-butted dad did. And they're willing to invest in aircraft because they really see the value. I mean, running that run between Sydney and Melbourne is, guys are doing that for a 1 or 2 hour meeting and turning around and going back, and they're back in their office in Melbourne or Sydney, depending where they started, in the afternoon again. So they see the value in it. So I think positively it'll keep increasing down there. And yeah, the ultra long range aeroplanes are really going to take off, and they're showing the value. These guys are straight to LA or wherever they need to be in the US, or well, they can't go to the UK. It's still one stop, but a quick tech stop, and they go all the way through to the UK with these things as well. So they truly do see the value versus the old days where it was 2 or 3 stops to get to either of those locations.
Right. And if we don't have any questions from the audience, who's going to win the Ashes cricket, which I know is huge in Singapore?
Well, that's always natural. It's always going to be Australia, I believe. But
and on that controversial
you can't talk. Come on, man.
And on that controversial note,
You're an implant.
thanks very much. Cheers, Darren.
Thanks very much, Al.